It was the mid-1930s. America and the world was in the grips of the worst economic depression in world history. And blacks were no exception. Throughout the nation, people of all races and nationalities were doing the best they could to survive. Terms unknown to the American lexicon became common for the day, such as Hoovervilles, small shanty towns that were named after then-President Herbert Hoover. And there were Bennett's buggies and Hoover wagons, which were used by farmers too poor to buy gasoline. President Hoover believed in a policy called rugged individualism, where one could pull himself up by his own bootstraps and become economically independent without any governmental assistance or intervention. This was his economic policy of the day. But to his credit, he tried numerous programs to get the country moving again, but they all failed. White Americans had no bootstraps to pull up, and African Americans had no boots. So everyone was in the same boat. During the Depression, bankers were so unpopular that bank robbers such as Bonnie and Clyde became folk heroes. It was also under this same economic climate that Americans who served her nation in World War I marched on Washington as bonus marchers, only to be greeted by a hail of gunfire from one of their former commanders, then Brigadier General Douglas McArthur. Just 10 years earlier, 1925, the Ku Klux Klan, America's original homegrown terrorists, held one of the largest demonstrations in the nation's capital, exerting their influence as a form of intimidation against African Americans and other minorities in order to protect the white race. Other terms such as hobo, persons who would go from city to city, hitching rides on trains to find work, and songs such as Brother, Can You Spare a Dime, dotted the national landscape and was dominant during the 1930s. Statistics of the 1930s include the following. The 1930s were turbulent times for Black Americans.
I've seen changes for the better. Not what they ought to be, but better than they were. When I saw my first mob in 1894, I was born in 1894, when I saw my first mob passing by our house on the way to Phoenix, about 4 miles from Greenwood, looking for Negroes to lynch. And I remember my father, they came by our house and they made my father get down on his knees and salute them with their guns drawn several times. And then I knew that had to change.
But it wasn't all doom and gloom for African Americans. Though times were tough, light was at the end of the tunnel. Joe Louis, the Brown Bomber, won the heavyweight title of the world in 1937, a title he kept until 1949. Edward Kennedy Ellington, the Duke, became world-renowned, and it was then that 15 persons who had a common interest from a common state formed the South Carolina Club that eventually became the Washington, D.C. chapter of South Carolina State University.
Well, my mother and a number of other ladies in the city, along with Benny C. Mays, they decided, they need to do something for friendship. And as a result, they started the organization.
Okay.
I can remember years ago, I was a little bit bored, about 6 years old, something like that, when they had a meeting at the house. And I can remember my mother cooking and fixing food all day long in preparation for the people to come by that night.
Okay.
They all came by in their finery.
Okay.
The women were all dressed up, men dressed up. Everybody, they had the meeting to go upstairs, get out the way. So, of course, I had to get out the way. But, as a little kid, you're always going to peep.
Right.
But you would peep in, you would see, and you saw all of these people, and you just marveled at them.
Yeah.
So, as a result of that, I think something was born in me then about South Carolina State.
Wow.
Okay, as time went by, I can remember telling Jerry Herbert one time about, I was going down for the summer. My father was Puma Porter. So as a result, every summer we went south to my cousin's place and my aunts and everything in King Street.
Okay.
And went out on the farm and worked. But as a result of that, one year we were going down and we had to go through Orangeburg because that's the way our pass carried us on the train.
Okay.
And I got up at South Carolina State, and we went into Whitehall, and they had an electric water fountain. I've never seen an electric water fountain putting out cold water before. I drank so much cold water that day.
It was an electric water fountain.
And generally you go turn around, but now you go, here's a water fountain that's producing cold water.
Cold water.
So cold water from Whitehall. That's knocked me. So it was another thing.
Okay.
Whitehall in South Carolina State.
December 7th, 1941, a day of infamy. Even as Japanese diplomats were conferring with Secretary of State Hull on peace measures, Nipponese planes were swooping down on Pearl Harbor. This pictorial record includes both U.S. films and pictures made by the enemy as they dropped their load of death on the naval base, on Wheeler Field, on civilian homes and schools. 100 Japanese planes and a number of midget submarines took part in the attack. In an hour and 5 minutes, the battleship Arizona was completely destroyed and 4 others severely damaged. 3 other battleships and 3 cruisers suffered lesser damage. Nearly 200 planes were destroyed.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
Graduates of South Carolina State University served our nation in peace and in war, and World War II was no exception. Dr. M. Maceo Nance, Colonel Samuel Stroman, and Julius Bryce served with distinction. After the fighting was over, it was now time to win the peace at home. With a GI Bill in hand, many African Americans took advantage of this opportunity and went back to college. As a result, the late 40s and 50s saw a major resurgence in alumni activities, and the Washington, D.C. chapter growth surge became the trademark of the chapter as noted by then chapter historian Mr. William C. Johnson, class of 48.
Unforgettable. That's what you are. Unforgettable, though near or far.
Things were looking up as the university celebrated a golden anniversary in 1946, where Dr. Benjamin E. Mays received honorary degrees. Dr. Mays' Easter speeches at the university were legendary.
Getting back now to the chapter here in D.C., the chapter started back with Dr. Mays, actually, when he was dean at Howard University's School of Divinity, and it continued to progress. Again, you were saying how the chapter helped you out during your career, well, and you were also one of the founders of the Rocks.
Well, yeah, the Rocks. But the history is the New York chapter was the big dog.
There you go. That's right.
New York chapter, they were the horse.
Okay.
And Washington was always treated as second best.
Okay.
And so that developed a spirit of competition between the chapters, but not adversarial.
Okay.
It never got between, because most of us know half the folks in both of the chapters were displaced from where they came from. and so you
nobody
know,
knew true
what
New
a lot of
Yorkers.
natives up there that were in all this mess, you know. And so over time, one went down and the other one just kept developing and developing on solid grounds. And so, you know, you found somebody who was from South Carolina State. If they came into town and called, it's on.
Okay.
Somebody was there for you. Somebody was there to be sure you were comfortable. And so it was sort of a referral type operation. And then it gradually got back where it started doing its events and doing all the big things and became a force in the alumni, thanks to a lot of the people that are still in it. But that's over time.
Sure.
And, you know, I'm talking 40, 50 years ago.
Wow.
Which can tax my memory because I'm not much older than that. I was a fast starter, so I got up quite very young, you know.
Graduate programs began at the university. The School of Law was open in Wilkerson Hall, with Benner C. Turner as the dean of the law school. Also during the 1940s, the War Department, as it was known then, decided to approve an Army ROTC program at the university, and the Department of Defense has never been the same. South Carolina State University was a family affair for many generations of Bulldog families. From the Webbers to the Hubbards, the sense of family has continued.
My name is Kitty Crosby, Flora, and I'm from Chester, South Carolina.
Okay.
I was at South Carolina State from 1947 to 1951. And I have been back to my graduation class, which was 51 years ago.
Rings a bell.
Yeah.
Now tell me about your brother again. You said he taught you physics?
Yes, Eddie graduated from high school at 15. And he was too young to go to college. So he worked, and they admitted him when he was 16. And he graduated from there. He got his master's there. And then he taught physics. He even wrote the physics workbook. And I was in his class. So,
what was that like?
Rough.
He showed you no slack?
He wrote my father, which is our father, as an individual. And he told him, he said, "Dear Reverend Crosby, your daughter is not living up to her potential." I remember that. And I would like for you to speak to her and tell her to increase her grade. So my father called me on the phone. I was in Bradham Hall, and he said, "Kath, this is your father. Your professor has called me and said, informed me that you're not living up to your potentials. Go to him and find out what you can do." And I did. And I did Ohm's Law. And I didn't do Newton's Law, but I did Ohm's Law, and I brought the grade up.
Wow.
They didn't play.
Wow. They didn't play. Wow. That's quite.